So if on our own part we try and make sure as researchers that we do our best within the lab and try to explain to these people, to make it seem as if, don't tell untrue stories. Don't paint the wrong picture about what you're doing, and make sure that the right people pass the right message across to people over time. I believe science communication will get better, and then people will also receive our information better also.
This is Immuno Africa, a podcast dedicated to spotlighting African immunology research. Here, we amplify the stories of Africans researching the immune system to tackle the continent's growing burden of infectious and non-communicable diseases. I am Weld Okete, a biochemist and science communicator from Nigeria, keenly interested in research about the immune system. My interest in immunology began during my undergraduate days at the university. Over the years, that initial spark has steadily grown and found expression in multiple ways. On Immuno Africa, I explore and communicate research about the immune system through the eyes, hands, and lips of the Africans who do them. Whether you are a seasoned immunologist, a budding researcher interested in immunology, or an untrained lay person, I hope the time you spend here rewards you remarkably. On this first episode, I speak with a research fellow at the African Center of Excellence in Genomics of Infectious Diseases, ACEGID, located in Osun State, Nigeria. My guest provides insight into the state of immunology research in Africa with a focus on Nigeria.
My name is Testimony Olumade, and I am a research fellow at the African Center of Excellence for Genomics of Infectious Diseases, ACEGID, at Redeemers University, Nigeria. My current research focuses on the metagenomics and immunological response to Lassa Virus in both rodent reservoirs and humans.
Okay, thank you very much. So you mentioned metagenomics. Maybe we could break that down a bit for people who may not be very familiar with what metagenomics and bioinformatics is about.
Okay, yeah. So by metagenomics, what we are trying to consider is basically everything within the environment of the genome of interest in that species. So aside or in addition to trying to research into the genome, the genetic material of whatever organism we're trying to research on, we're also trying to check for everything else, every other organism that also exists within that biological environment. That's what metagenomics means. Just two words, meta and genomics.
Okay. So like you're not just considering one organism, you're considering every other organism within the environment of your target organism.
Exactly. Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
Okay, interesting. So regards your research into Lassa fever at ACEGID, I think it must have been a little bit challenging. I know ACEGID has this standard in Africa, but doing your PhD here in Africa, and how has it been? Any unique challenge or experience you think you would like to share?
Studying in Africa comes with its own unique challenges. I mean, these are not challenges that are new to the world, neither are they new to the continent, right? As a student, you have to give your best. You have to make sure that you're right at the top of your game.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you're doing everything you can to make sure that your research is successful, particularly if it's a postgraduate degree. Although a positive side to all of that story is that ACEGID gives you some kind of a platform where it gets easier to do good quality research in Africa, because then you have soft landing. Basically, you've got international collaborations, you've got funding, and so on and so forth. So it gets easier to do such research. For example, going to other states or communicating with public health figures, organizations, institutions, trying to particularly request for ethical approval for such a big research definitely have been more difficult, if not for the kind of relationship that the organization ACEGID already has with the federal government. So yes, you get some benefits of such, but then it doesn't rule out the fact that the challenges of running such a project are. are also still there.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. Africa has its unique challenges, regardless of the location and the resources that are being provided. There's still that African aspect to conducting research. So, would delve into immunology in Africa. I know immunology is generally about the immune system, what it does, how it functions, what isn't working well, or what is working well, and how it can be improved. So, what would you say about immunology research in Africa? How far have we come?
Well, immunology in Africa is a very interesting topic. I think it's one that's long overdue.
Yeah.
Because since the 18th century, when Dr. Jenner, whom we generally refer to as the father of immunology, first introduced the field of immunology, talking about smallpox vaccine. We've come a very long way in the study of immunology, but it looks like in Africa, not much has been done. If you look at statistics, as of 2016, outside South Africa, there was no other university department that was dedicated to teaching and researching immunology. As of 2016, no other department. It was only in South Africa. Although things are getting better now, I know there's one at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. There's a dedicated department of immunology. I know there's another one at Uganda, dedicated department of immunology. But then this basically sticks to development of immunology research in Africa. And particularly if you also decide to look at immunology output from Africa. So how much research have we done into immunology, and then what is research output generally across the world? And of course, you can try to evaluate or assess that using citation reports of each indexes of African authors so far. And then you would find that the highest or the best ranked first in Africa is South Africa, not surprisingly, right? It's actually South Africa. But then if you check South Africa compared to the rest of the world, say Europe, for instance, South Africa only compares with Poland. Now, guess what? Poland is ranked 16th in the whole of Europe.
Wow.
Exactly. And Nigeria, that's supposed to be the richest country in Africa, is ranked 12th in Africa.
Wow.
So this speaks immunology research in Africa to say that we have a lot to do. And interestingly, I would also add that Africans are immensely blessed. We are blessed with talent. We are blessed with even the diseases themselves, because you would agree with me that the bulk of the burden of infectious diseases are in Africa.
Exactly.
Malaria is in Nigeria, tuberculosis, Africa, name it, HIV, and so on and so forth. A lot of these infectious diseases have their burdens highest or greatest in Africa. And if we've got talent, we've got people who can address these issues, people who have it in them, they probably just need, a little push. They need the training, they need the education. Let them stand up to the challenge and, get things done in research into immunology. Then, it's something that can be done. It's something we should look into.
So I'm grateful you mentioned the issue about taking immunology courses in Africa. You mentioned 2016. As of 2016, South Africa was the only country where there was a dedicated department of immunology. I think even recently, I tried checking online here in Nigeria for immunology programs, and I think it was only the University of Ibadan that popped up, and it was an MSc program for immunology. And I'm wondering what the other schools in Nigeria are really doing about immunology programs. Because
I don't think there's much that's happening, really. The best students will probably get from those institutions will be basic immunology, and not grounded research into the field of immunology. And when you don't train people in that field, when people don't get enough of information, only those who are personally or individually motivated into the field of immunology would do any research into immunology. So basically, you can't give what you don't have.
Yeah, that's true. And the fact is that most Africans, of course, Africans who have experience with immunology research, who have made significant progress with immunology, they didn't study here in Africa. Even our young people now, they are all concerned about traveling out of the continent. For especially those who will be interested in this kind of research, and they know they can't get it here within the continent, they have to travel out. And we are not even sure if they would even want to come back to invest their expertise and experience in making the continent better with regards to research.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. It's sad, but then I mean it's just what's obtainable. Because for anyone who gets the opportunity for an international training where you're in an environment where you get, maximum quality in education, maximum quality in exposure to cutting edge research and technology to help you. I mean, you're not only doing research, you're not only hearing theoretical definitions and explanations for immunological concepts. You're actually carrying out the research and you're seeing results.
Yeah.
I mean, you can walk out of your laboratory where you're building antibodies, and right next door is the clinic or the hospitals where there are clinical trials going on. So it makes more sense. It gives life to the research. And then even if you got the opportunity to go back to your country where you already know what challenges are available, it becomes an issue. I mean, you probably want to think well, count the cost before deciding to go back to settle in your home country. I mean, these are the issues, and with hope and plans, and with trying to convince public health officials and the government, maybe these things can change over time.
Okay, so I believe you were aware of some of these challenges before you decided to go into research about infectious diseases. I understand Africa has this huge burden of infectious diseases. There is malaria, like you mentioned, tuberculosis, Ebola, Lassa fever, and then the very quite recent monkeypox that started spreading in European and American nations. So why did you still decide to study immunology? Why you were aware of the multiple challenges you would have to grapple with to study, especially here in Africa? So what was the motivation for you to study infectious diseases?
The motivation to study infectious diseases for me was from a passion for public health that I have always had.
Okay. I
mean, I've always seen people get sick or people die due to infectious diseases, and these are illnesses that given sufficient research we can do something about. I have seen diseases eradicated. I mean, I've seen infections healed. I mean, so for people to die when something can be done about it is what spurred my interest into research, particularly in infectious diseases. And then studying in Nigeria basically was because I mean I had this burden for my own people. This was at the time 2016 when I decided to begin graduate education. I had a burden for Nigerians. I was hoping that I could contribute my own quota. Just give my own little contribution to research that would improve public health in Nigeria. And then looking at the challenges on the ground, funding, collaboration, international exposure, sharing of ideas, all of those things, development, in biomedical research, and being abreast of information, not when the world has moved on from a particular technology. That is when you get the technology in the country,
that happens,
right?
Yeah.
So it just appeared that there was such platform at ACEGID at the time, and then it seemed okay, maybe I could tap into it, be within Nigerians. And I loved the project I was going to work on at the time, because then it included me going to the field, me seeing the people I was collecting samples from, me interacting with them. And it's been a very interesting experience, because I remember when I first went to the field in a small town in Ebonyi State, we tried to, do some form of community entry, talk to the villagers, talk to the heads of the community, tell them why we are here. And then about the third house we visited, it was a home where out of a family of 11, about 6 of them had died due to Lassa virus. Right? Yes, they had died due to Lassa fever. And then we tried to explain to the family, to let them know that this is the reason why we're here, this is why we are conducting this research. And then a little child, maybe not up to 3-4 years old, maybe 5 at most, looked at us and said, "Why are you just coming now?" And then it made complete sense. It was a very emotional moment for everyone, because these are our people, these are Nigerians suffering from these diseases. And if for whatever reason we can give our own contribution into the research, particularly in Lassa, which is my own research focus, then of course it will make matters better for the common person. So yes, those and many more are, that basically is the passion for studying infectious diseases in Nigeria.
That story was quite touching and relatable. And I think the part that stood out for me the most was the question the young boy asked. Why are you just coming? Why are you just coming? In my opinion, that question conveys the need for a sense of urgency to how research is conducted, especially with respect to the translation of research. Scientists need to be concerned not just about making new discoveries and developing better therapies, but ensuring that these discoveries and therapies are made accessible to those who need them the most and right on time. Building on that experience, I and my guest delve into the need for science communication in Africa, especially against the backdrop of the misinformation that has hit us in this pandemic.
We touched a bit of science communication, and I think the whole idea of making these people understand that this is what you came to do and this is the benefit it will bring to them and this is why you have to do it. And I think that is one aspect that here in Africa, to an extent, I feel we are lagging behind. There is research, yes. I know not so much is happening, but even the little that is happening, I feel Africans have not been deliberate enough about communicating research. And the impact of that was really felt with the whole pandemic and the misinformation and so many things happening about whether vaccines work or vaccines don't work, whether this is the truth or this is not. So I just want us to touch a bit on the need for us to talk about our research, for us to make people understand what's happening. Because I feel if Nigerians had benefited previously from polio, I think at a point polio was eradicated in Nigeria. I think now we still have some cases that are not like original cases, maybe from the vaccines. But then I feel like if there had been enough information, if people had been really educated about what had happened before and why vaccines could help eradicate polio and measles and help with some of all these diseases, the reception of COVID vaccines or our attitude to COVID itself would have been different. So what's your perception of the need to communicate science in Africa and what can we do better, particularly with respect to diseases and immunology?
Yes. I completely agree with you. Because this wave of head information, I mean, once a particular person, a particular community has this idea or this view, this opinion about any scientific concept, any scientific product, then it becomes an issue because then they just swing the entire community along and everyone just goes on with that opinion without even trying to understand, the truth about that particular drug, vaccine, maybe. So it's actually very important that scientists pass this message across to the people. The need to communicate scientific results and breakthroughs cannot be overemphasized. Because the job of the researcher in the lab or the clinician in the hospital is made futile if it is not translated to the common man. I mean, why do we study health anyway? Why do we go into health research? Why are we in life science? Why are we clinicians? It's to give our talent, is to do the best we can to make sure that healthcare is affordable and that people get quality healthcare, right, in the community. So if in the end you do all of this in the lab and then it's not translation and there's no way you can bring out what you've done in the lab to try and help the common person out there in villages and communities, then the entire effort has just been practically wasted, so to speak. So it is very important, very, very important. And maybe what we can do better, particularly as a country, is to tell our story, particularly in a language that these common people will understand. Sometimes the researchers can't do it alone, and this is where you need everybody to join hands together to get this done. So basically, not just researchers, you probably want to involve epidemiologists, you want to involve anthropologists, you want to involve public health officials, you want to involve policymakers. These are people that can come together, make sure that the information is passed across to the common man. And then on the part of the researchers also, we also want to try and make sure that we are not dubious with our results, that we don't manipulate numbers just because we are looking for some expected reactions from people that we're trying to communicate with. Because, I mean, The only reason why, or a part of the reasons why we're getting vaccine denial and unacceptance amongst people today is because of their experience, particularly with polio, for example, in Nigeria.
Okay.
So basically, they have cancelled vaccines because, you brought vaccine one time, and then this is what has been going on, and then this happened, now you're bringing another vaccine. How do we know it's not the same, or rather be fine than,
Yeah.
So if on our own part, we try and make sure as researchers that we do our best within the lab and then try to explain to these people, don't make it seem as if, don't tell untrue stories. Don't paint the wrong picture about what you're doing. And then make sure that the right people pass the right message across to people over time. I believe science communication would get better, and then the people would also receive our information better also.
I think you've touched on some very, very important themes regarding telling our stories and telling them truthfully. And then they need to also uphold research ethics, not trying to just refurbish results to suit your expectations and not the actual outcome of your research. Those are really important points we have to take note of. So I have this question about immunology and hype. So I'm just going to provide a background to it, partly because of COVID-19 vaccines came, and then we talked so much about how much the vaccines could do, how much they could save lives. Of course, there was this campaign by the World Health Organization about vaccines saves life. And I feel with the response people have got from the vaccines, there are people who have been vaccinated first, second, 3 doses, and who have gotten booster doses, who still came down with COVID. Is there an aspect of us hyping immunology? And I could also talk about certain immunotherapies, let's say the monoclonal antibodies and say CAR T cells. But sometimes when you read some of these clinical trials, you still see maybe the progress reports recorded were not for a very long time, or some of the persons who were involved in the trials, they still died after getting the therapy. So what would you say about that?
Oh, well, that's a very interesting question, to be honest, right? And that is one that even we as researchers are still looking into, because COVID, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, and true, there have been vaccines, right? Vaccines have been rolled out, people have been vaccinated, and yes, there are vaccine breakthrough infections. But then we need to understand that we need to let people know that vaccines, particularly in this case, using COVID as an example, will not always prevent you from getting infected. That's not always the goal. We need to understand that vaccines many times don't mean that you won't get infected, but most times that if at all you get infected, they increase your chances of beating the infection. There are vaccines definitely that can, prevent infection. That's also possible. But using COVID, using SARS-CoV-2 as an example, this was a novel virus that we're still trying to understand. We can't say we understand the virus 100%. It was an immunological breakthrough to start with, that within 1 year of the pandemic, there were vaccines already rolled out.
That's true.
Thanks to the fact that we already had technologies in place for rapid vaccine development. And then there were different approaches to the same vaccine. So it is possible, true, and I'm sure that scientists are still looking into that. We also would understand that this is also a rapidly evolving virus. Look at how many variants we have had in the last 2 years. So these things would contribute to vaccine breakthrough infections. It is not to say that vaccines don't work. Vaccines work. However, if the introduction of a vaccine will save 1,000 people, and out of that 1,000 people, there are a few cases that still end up with the infection, you probably want to look at the ethical side of issues, where true, you want to consider the health of those people, but then you're also trying to save a lot more. So, and those are praises that we probably want to give researchers in immunology. Of course, they are still working, and I'm sure they know that there's more work to do. But then the little progress that we've had, there are other people who have been vaccinated and haven't come down with the disease again. We should also tell the stories and balance information.
Okay, yeah, that's true. So I think going back to what you said about telling complete stories and telling them truthfully. So I believe if the members of the public are to understand this perspective you just gave about vaccines, that because of COVID and the nature of the novelty of the virus, that it's possible that these vaccines may not prevent you from getting infected, but they can prevent you from the severe symptoms.
Disease.
Yeah. We have to tell our stories, tell them completely and tell them truthfully. So members of the public are able to, they get this complete understanding and they are able to make informed choices. So I think this might be my last question. I want to ask about the challenges you've mentioned about immunology in Africa, immunology in Nigeria. So how do we set this balance between the need to build our own structures and support African immunology or Nigerian immunology research, and that dependence on the global north for support, for funding, for collaboration? So how do we balance that? Because I feel continuous dependence on these nations like the US or the UK or China or Germany, continuous dependence on them will kind of prevent us from investing or giving attention to building our own structures, because there will be that thought that, okay, we can always, even if we don't have these machines or we don't have these resources, we don't have these skills or expertise, we can always rely on these nations. So how do we balance that? The need to groom ourselves, build ourselves, and then still remain open to collaborations?
Right. That's probably the most important question of the night. And I think we need to understand that this is going to be a collaborative effort. No one person can do it. Okay. That's the thing. Every single immunology researcher, every single person who's interested in studying immunology, the government, institutions, organizations, everyone has a part to play. Because, I mean, it doesn't matter how much passion you have garnered over the years. If you're not able to turn all those beautiful ideas you have into research outputs that can help people and can be implemented, then it's of no use, right? So we need to pull our weight together, pull our efforts, look within ourselves, look within our countries, within the continent, see how we can help ourselves grow or leverage international funding when available to conduct our own research so that we can tell our own story. I mean, Africa as a continent has been regarded as the continent of the future, because this is where evolution began. So it won't be long before interest into Africans and information embedded within the African genome map would become important even for the world outside Africa. And the earlier we take responsibility for ourselves and our own research, receiving help where necessary, the better for us. That is why I consider it to be a collaborative effort. Everybody needs to come together. Students, researchers, do the best they can. I mean, the government, for example, has to help build more schools with dedicated departments in immunology, and then get professionally trained experts in the field of immunology, so that we can build this critical mass of scientists in immunology that can then study Africans to tell the African story. This may not happen in the next few years, but with consistent effort and persistence, I believe that is something we can achieve. Just very recently, I was thinking about this same question, and I was considering something like that. How I understand that there are immunologists in theory, there are people who really want to study immunology, not just in Nigeria but in Africa. But because there's no we don't have this platform where we can all relate, share experiences and desires for Africa. Everyone just goes as a solo scientist until we probably garner some energy to leave the country and leave the continent, and then maybe never come back. So I was thinking of, if there's actually an opportunity to bring people together so that we can, rub minds together and have these discussions, it would actually be a lot better. And maybe that's the best way to start.
collaborative
Yeah.
effort. So we just have to come together and build our own research, build our own African research, tell our own stories. And I think something very important that you mentioned, that we should only be open to help that is necessary. So if it's something we can think, something we can solve ourselves, there's no need running to these nations and maybe asking them for funding or asking them for support, because I think something that you don't try, something you never start out to do, there's no way you can get better at it. So if we start somewhere, just start small, we can build something better and have this a beautiful future that we foresee for African immunology research. But if we keep running to the nations, we just remain stuck where we are.
I had a great time conversing with Testimony Olumade on this episode. Well, here is how I would summarize our entire conversation. Strengthening the state of immunology research in Africa would require the joint efforts of scientists, the government, and members of the public. And very importantly, scientists have to be more deliberate about communicating research, telling true and complete stories about African science. I hope you enjoyed the entire conversation as much as I did. You can follow this podcast on Instagram and Twitter at ImmunoAfrica. On LinkedIn, it's the Immunology in Africa podcast. And do well to connect with me across social media at World Okete. Thank you for listening.